Hello everyone, today we are going to see how to sand a wall to prepare it before being able to repaint it. In my container house project, I decided to keep the corrugated metal walls instead of putting plasterboard in front. Because it saved me space and I wanted to keep this industrial aesthetic. My containers have been on the oceans for 15 years, making them rusty and scratched with 18 layers of paint. Finally, they need to be spruced up. And for that, I've decided to sandblast them. To remove all traces of rust and to sand off the old paint so that the new one can adhere better. That's what we do on all types of walls, and that's what I'm going to show you today. Hi, I'm Julien Malara, and this is my house container. I'm 26 years old, have no knowledge of do-it-yourself, but I've taken on the crazy challenge of building an affordable and eco-friendly house. I'm also trying to develop my resilience and live in harmony with nature. I'm filming and sharing this on my channel, so subscribe to follow the adventure. To start, I suggest we go through all the tools I've tried, but which were not suitable. We should review this to ensure you don't repeat the mistakes I made based on the tests I've conducted and conclusions I've drawn. The first tool I used to sand a wall is an orbital sander. It's the classic sander when you want to normally sand drywall. Indeed, it's made for drywall, but not really for the saw. It doesn't work very well. And especially since it's a corrugated sheet metal, it's a hassle to get into the corrugations and all the little holes with a big eccentric sander. So not at all suitable. Jan, who built his container house in Bourg-en-Bresse, for example, used this kind of tool, and it took him more than 3 months. He had no choice but to share a brief anecdote. Because he had already laid all his floor, so he couldn't sand, because otherwise it would have destroyed his entire floor. There you have it. Sanding before doing the rest is crucial. Do you get why? The second tool is my grinder with a metal brush on it. It's super effective, it strips, it really sands in depth, especially when there is a lot of rust. The problem is that it's heavy, vibrates, and wrecks your arms. You're going to sand for 5 minutes and then you're going to be on the side exhausted. So very clearly, this is not a tool made for sanding 300 square meters. However, for some small areas where there is a lot of rust or difficult things to remove, it's a very good tool. You're starting to understand all the hand tools that require being stuck to the wall to sand. It's not at all effective, it's not suitable, it takes too much time and it requires too much energy. So it's time we move on to the sandblasting solution. And there are two types of sandblasting: hydroblasting. That is, we use pressurized water to send the sand against the wall and sand, and Aerosandblasting, where we use pressurized air to send the sand and sand the walls. The principle is to put sand in a bucket, dip a tube into the bucket, and connect it to the kasha. When you send pressurized water, it will create a suction effect and send sand mixed with your water. I tested it, and from a stripping point of view, it works really well. However, hydrosanding has two major problems. The first is that it uses a special hydrosanding sand, which is expensive. 15 euros for a 55 pounds bag, nearly impossible to find in stores, and in the stores where it is available. They store it outside under the rain, so it takes 3 to 5 days to dry it outdoors in full sun. It's very complicated. And second point, it takes about one. A 25 kilo bag to sand a square meter of wall, and once you've sanded, well, if you want to reuse the sand, it's in the huge pool you'll have on the ground. So, you will first have to remove the water, try to take the water-soaked sand and dry it again for 4 to 5 days. In other words, it's a monstrous job. For all these reasons, and also because we totally lose the ecological logic when we use hundreds of liters of water to sandblast our walls, I've decided to give up hydrosanding and switch to aerosanding, so using air to project my sand. I'm going to start by giving you a list of all the equipment you'll need for aerosanding, and then I'll show you how I sandblasted my containers. To start, you need a good compressor that sends at least 150 liters of air per minute, and therefore, which sucks in more because it has to send 150 liters of air continuously. I bought this compressor, 100 liters, 3 horsepower for 500 euros. Really get a good compressor, it's important. You need a 22 yards hose that allows at least 39.626 gallons that amount of air to pass through. And why? 20 meters. Because the goal is to place the compressor as far away from the sandblasting area as possible so that the sand does not damage the compressor. And then This 20-meter hose, we're going to connect it to a mobile sandblaster, a 75-liter sandblaster that I bought from BPAC. Why didn't I buy this from a traditional do-it-yourself store like King Merlin? Because nobody normally uses this tool. It's really an unknown tool. Stores don't sell it. Nobody knows how to use it. There are very few tutorials on YouTube, hence the interest in this video. Really, there was only one tutorial for this tool, so I'm really going to explain to you how it works. And with this sandblaster, you will receive a funnel to fill it with sand and a hood to protect your head. Now that we've seen the tools, we're going to look together at all the consumables you're going to have to use for sandblasting. Small aside, I've looked everywhere to see if there are professional sandblasters that I could use. I found nothing. Besides my painter's 10,000 euro sandblaster, I found nothing better than my own 190 sandblaster. So let's keep in mind that it's not a tool made to sand so much surface normally, but I really found nothing better. So there you have it. The most important consumable, the sandblasting sand, with a grain size less than 1 mm. You can find it in all hardware stores for about 7 euros for a 25 kilogram bag. You can reuse it 4 to 5 times, making sure to sift it before reusing it to remove any debris that could clog your sandblaster. And be careful, stores store the sand outdoors. If the weather is nice, you're in luck. However, if it's humid or has rained recently, you'll need to dry it for a while, 1 to 3 days before using it, because your sand needs to be extremely dry so as not to clog your sandblaster. Second consumable, the nozzle of your sandblaster. It is composed of a seal and a ceramic head, and these two parts need to be replaced when the hole becomes too large due to the sand passing through. I've estimated that it should be replaced every 25 square meters. A nozzle costs around 3-4, and a seal is about 2. So there you have it. You need to think about changing this regularly so that the sand pressure is always good. The third consumable is the visor of the sandblasting hood. Because after a while of sandblasting and getting sand in your face, it will scratch your visor and you won't be able to see anything at all. The visor costs 7 euros. It's best to have a few spares to clearly see the surface being sandblasted. In summary, for my sandblasting project, I bought a compressor for 480 euros, a hose for 50 euros, a sandblaster for 190 euros, 35 bags of sand for 240 euros, 10 replacement buses for 50 euros, 10 replacement seals for 30 euros, and 10 replacement visors for 70 euros. That is a total of 1,110 euros for the sandblasting project as a whole, Now that we've seen what equipment to buy and how much it's going to cost us, I'm going to show you how it works. To start, we're going to connect our air hose to our compressor. We make sure to turn on our compressor. We take our hose that we're going to connect to our sandblaster. Here, we verify the air intake valve is fully shut. For now, I don't want to send air into my sandblaster and I connect my cable. Here, we have a moisture filter that will be responsible for filtering the moisture that comes via the air from the compressor. To avoid wetting the sand, it works pretty well, except on rainy days or days when it's really humid, because your sand needs to be really ultra dry for it to work well. I'll reiterate this countless times in the video as it's a crucial point. So now I'm checking that the valve that will send my sand under the sandblaster is properly closed. I open the cap, I put it in my funnel, and I'm going to fill the tank with about 4 10-liter buckets of sand. The sandblaster is a 75-liter sandblaster, but it should not be filled more than 2/3 of its capacity for it to work properly. So here are 4 40-liter buckets for a 75-liter capacity. It will do the job. Next, I make sure there's no sand on my cap so it doesn't let any air through. I close it tightly. I check that the valve that will send air into the nozzle is closed, and off we go. Before I gear up, I'm going to show you the procedure. First step, always fully open the valve that lets air into the nozzle. Step 2, always fully open the valve that sends air from the compressor into the tank. Step 3, open the valve that sends air into the nozzle by 1/3. A little bit more. Step 4, I gradually open the valve that sends sand until sand comes out of the nozzle. Now I'm ready to sandblast. You will surely need to readjust these settings several times to find the right pressure, the right amount of sand. And when you're done, you first close the sand inlet valve until there's no more sand coming out of the nozzle. And then you close the air inlet valve and you can take a well-deserved break. My sandblaster is filled with sand. I have the compressor that continuously sends air into it. Today we're going to sandblast this small section of wall. You see that I left them intact. I sandblasted around. We see in white. My goal today is going to be to sand this layer to remove the gray and fall back on the white layer that is underneath to be able to repaint more easily. For that, pants, jacket, gloves to protect yourself, a mask because you're going to eat sand and dust. The hood to protect the head and especially the eyes. Next, a noise-cancelling helmet as it's going to be quite messy. Now that I look cool, let's go. I just finished sandblasting 2 square meters, which was already exhausting. Imagine doing the whole thing. But I'm happy. I've gone back to the white layer. So there, my goal was just to lightly scratch the paint for better adhesion. It's more than enough. I removed all the rust traces from the corners, going back to clean steel, restoring my wall. If you ever have doubts about the amount of sanding you need to do, don't hesitate to ask sellers. In paint stores, normally they know how to prepare a wall before repainting it. In conclusion, in my opinion, sandblasting is the ideal technique for sanding steel, and especially very large surfaces. I still had 300 square meters of corrugated sheet metal, it's important that I specify, of corrugated sheet metal, because it's 10% more surface area than if it was a flat wall. Well, that's good to know. With a sandblaster tank, so that means 4 to 5 or 2 bags of 25 keys of sand. You will be able to sand and about. You will be able to sand 4 to 5 square meters and for half an hour to sand and 4 to 5 square meters. Then you will have to take half an hour to pick up the sand, sift it and be able to reuse it, and half an hour to rest. To solve especially the 1,000 problems that you are going to have with this sandblaster. When I say solve the millions of small problems of this sandblaster, I mean that you are going to vomit blood. Honestly, I said it was the ideal technique, but I didn't say it was going to be easy. Because to start with this sandblaster, I repeat, but absolutely not, made for sand, and 300 square meters. So the valve that sends sand down will be at the end of 120,150 square meters. You're going to have to change it. Lots of problems all the time, so prepare yourself to buy spare parts. But I didn't find a professional table maker, so if you find one and put it in the comments, I would be very disgusted. Second point, you need to sand when it's hot and dry. You see where we are now? We are in containers, which means I work in an oven. There you go. It's quite funny. A third little point, the sand that is in there must be extremely dry. This is the video's most crucial point. It cost me days, truly. If the sand inside is even a little bit wet, or if there's humidity from the air, humidity in the air, and it moistens the sand inside, it's over. It will clog your sandblaster. You will have to turn it over, get the sand out, and let it dry for several hours in the sun to really avoid having wet sand inside, because it will clog and you won't be able to project sand anymore. That's the problem I've had most often with this sandblaster. So forget about sandblasting on rainy days or on humid days. In short, it took me about 15 days of work spread over a month to sandblast my 4 containers. So the ceiling too, that's another hassle. I'll spare you the details. But on the scaffold, sandblasting and eating sand, because yes, you're going to eat sand, there's dust in the air everywhere. Even if you have the mask, my lungs currently look like a sand smoker. Anyway, it's a very challenging, very difficult site, but I finished. Now I'm going to have to apply a coat of primer. So anti-rust paint to prevent the walls that are now exposed from rusting again. And the next project will be to cut out my windows, my doors, put up my supports, do all the carpentry. That will be the subject of the next video. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss it. And most importantly, don't forget to support us on Typee to help us finance this whole series of videos. And so that I can continue to eat sand to make tutorials for you and tell you how to survive the hell of these works. The last video was administrative hell. This one is sand hell. In short, I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I'm happy to make this series of videos to do this project. I hope it interests you, that it serves you, that it will be useful to you. I'm at a loss for words. I'm ending this video here. Thank you for watching it until the end and see you soon.